it's been an awful year. The thing is, it looks like it's going to be awful for a while to come. Can a vaccine ultimately be the panacea?
Yes, it can be, but the real panacea is to introduce a rigorous testing regime because, as you said earlier, we're looking at the worst year on record, $118 billion of loss this year for our airlines globally. And even if we have a vaccine, it will take 12 to 18 months to deploy it globally. So we need to restart aviation as quickly as possible. And the way to do that, and what we're really asking governments to do, is to implement testing and restart aviation.
Well, absolutely, testing is one component here, and another is the development of a mobile app, I believe, that IATA's got in its sights to demonstrate coronavirus-free status. Tell us a little bit about where you are with that.
So Hong Kong and Singapore have been looking to start a bubble, which is really good news, and it's a general bubble, not an essential travel bubble. And we're developing with the authorities and the airlines in both countries an app to assist that. There are 4 components. First component registers the health requirements in each location. The second component registers the testing or the medical centres where passengers can have the testing conducted. The third is a certification to show that you are negative. And the fourth is a contactless app to make the progress through the airport as touchless as possible. And we were developing that before COVID came along. So that's a fairly straightforward development. The underlying structures of this is it's open source, so open source standards that anybody can use, and a modular design so that you can pick the modules that you want. And the idea is to develop something that's cheap, effective, and gives a tool that governments and airlines can use to get aviation going as quickly as possible and as safely as possible.
And when we look at aviation, when do you expect a return to perhaps 2019 levels of traffic? That's one part of my question. And the other part of my question is, when that does happen, will airlines be that much more efficient and arguably stronger as a consequence of the layoffs they've had and the streamlining of their operations, which has been taking place during all this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, to answer the first one, we're expecting that international travel won't recover to 2019 levels until 2024. It's going to be a long, slow haul. Domestic travel, however, will recover more quickly, and we're expecting domestic travel to have recovered by 2022 globally. We're hoping that the airlines will achieve sort of cash positive by the end of next year. Will they be more efficient at the end of this process? Undoubtedly. But the real thing, the challenge, what we've got to do now is make sure that the airlines survive, so that when we do see the restart, there are still enough airlines to provide lift and to ensure global connectivity. So right now it's about survival and about government help for airlines.
Well, and then we look at Asia Pacific. I mean, we've got the aviation industry being, I suppose, dragged out of the woods in some ways anyway because of the China domestic market. Does this ultimately perhaps lead to Asian airlines having more influence within IATA in the medium term?
I think the China domestic story is a very good one, and we're hoping that fairly soon next year China will open up internationally. And of course, this Hong Kong development with Singapore starting a general bubble is really, really good news. So I think China's got a big role to play because, of course, it's got such large volumes. Will that mean that Asia Pac in general has a bigger influence on IATA? I don't think it'll have a bigger impact, but it'll have a very important impact in terms of providing models for recovering from this pandemic.
All right, and let's not forget also that we have at the same time the idea that there could be other travel bubbles in this part of the world. Give us an idea of some of the candidates for such kind of a free traffic, if you will, free trade in flights.
Yeah. So the idea behind bubbles is that country A has a similar level of transmission to country B. So you're not actually taking a risk by opening up to travel between country A and country B. And then actually you're making it even safer by introducing a very rigorous testing regime. ICAO shares this opinion, the International Civil Aviation Organization. They've just earlier this week distributed a manual on testing and cross-border risk management. So countries in this region that look like good candidates for this sort of bubble, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Brunei, are all countries that have the pandemic under control and could reasonably expect to launch more bubbles, in addition, of course, to China and Singapore.
Conrad, just going on to the 737 MAX, Boeing seeking the Chinese regulator to get it approved to fly after the FAA has. How important is it to get this aircraft into the skies, given that many of these legacy carriers in this part of the world may well be forced to fly, let's say, short to medium haul routes rather than long haul routes where perhaps their fleets are not fit for purpose?
Yeah, I think it's important, and of course there were a lot of orders from this part of the world for that type. So the sooner that all of the regulators around the world can feel comfortable with the work that Boeing has done, the better, and the sooner that we can get the aircraft into the skies, the better. We've been doing a lot of work with ICAO, with regulators around the region, about restarting aviation, and the more new aircraft we have, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you restart aviation, you're going to have a lot of pilots who haven't flown for a long time. Now, that is another problem, is it not? Because if it's 2 years away, what's going to happen with those pilots?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And this, in fact, was one of the early things we've been looking at. We actually called them special bubbles for pilot simulators. So we're putting in place, with government assistance around the region, sort of revised standards to enable pilots to come to simulators to make sure that they can remain current. It's a very, very good point, and I'm glad to say that governments are doing something about this. It's very good.